David Cornwell, known to millions as John Le Carré, is widely regarded as one of the best novelists of our time. He began writing in the early 60s and garnered international success with his third novel, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. But with the end of the Cold War, Le Carré has shifted his attention away from Russia and focused on Central America. In The Tailor of Panama, his 16th novel, he examines the world of corruption and espionage in Panama, and I'm very pleased to have him back on this program. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Great to see you, David.
Thank you.
It really is. There's a lot to talk about. Let me just talk first, before we talk about The Tailor of Panama. You've written about Russia, many trips over there.
Yes.
Give me a sense about Russia and today, and Gorbachev, and Yeltsin, and Levitt, and the KGB.
Well, I think the first overall thing one has to say is this, that with every move and every change in present Russian politics, what we see is the continuum of Tsarist life. We went from the white Tsars to the red Tsars, and now we've got to the new grey Tsars, whatever color they are. But the systems of change are much more subtle than we understand, so that former party secretaries suddenly become local bank managers. We're all good capitalists now. But, you know, the wiring in the house remains the same. The people who've taken over the house are a little bit altered, but not much. It's same show, different hats, a lot of familiar faces.
Let me interrupt you. That's an interesting point, because even in Central Europe, too, you're seeing in Poland and other places, and in Hungary, former communists now running in democratic elections.
That's right.
In some cases winning.
That's right. And we're talking
because
about...
they know
they
politics.
They know politics. They've got their people. They've got their muscle. And we think of Russia now becoming a very criminal country, which indeed it is, and a very windy one. But we should not forget that particularly for the last 15 or 20 years of the so-called evil empire, Russia was enormously corrupt. I mean, to the point where Kazakhstan had to give up growing fruit. It was the fruit bowl of the Soviet Union, and grow cotton, so that the crooks in the agricultural ministry could sell the bales of cotton to Indian dealers across the border. And, you know, the whole community, that's an entire country, didn't know why it was no longer picking fruit but trying to learn to grow cotton. The reason was that it was a cash crop, a durable cash crop, and the boys were making a fortune. One has to think in those terms. My question, one of my first questions of Gorbachev, whether he has now any regrets about issuing a secret edict in 1987 to privatize the Communist Party. I mean, it's one of the most startling and furtive gestures that any first secretary of the Soviet Communist Party could conceivably think of.
Mikhail Gorbachev is a man that has plenty to regret at the same time. And when you look, he's got to be unsure about his place in history.
Yes.
On the other hand, he should feel a certainty about his place in history, because
Charlie,
he was there at a pivotal time.
I agree, and he did more than that, Charlie. I really think that he was the emperor who stepped out of the wings and said, boys, to us, the West, I have no clothes.
Yes, the emperor's naked.
And that's right. I am a naked emperor. So what are we going to do about it? We can't have my country as a power vacuum. We can still threaten you, he was saying. We can do all that stuff, but we'll ruin ourselves. And gradually you're ruining ourselves. So let's sit down and do business. And it wasn't until 1990, I mean, still in 1990, the CIA and probably other intelligence agencies were saying, it's still a game, pay attention. It was very, very hard at the end of the Cold War for anybody to believe that this was the simple truth, but it was. And I think that to have had the courage to do that, and finally to persuade us of it, for that he does deserve his place in history.
You have been back a number of times, and I've read some of your accounts of going back, and you talked to Kalagin and Batakian, what was the name of the other KGB chief?
Oleg Kalugin, Bakatin.
Are you finding out, with access to KGB operatives and with access to the archives, yours or journalists who are there, anything about the espionage business that you didn't understand?
Well, I think that the KGB, in some respects, is becoming de-demonized. There was more banality, there was more corruption, there was more incompetence than we were allowed to suspect at that time. Probably those who debriefed defectors, they had a better and a closer picture of what was going on. But overall, they were a beastly organization. They were, in many respects, extraordinarily efficient, and not in many ways so different from the way we imagined them. The KGB, one has to understand, was also a refuge for people who were very critical of the system. They supplied, in a very cunning way, a safe haven for people who might otherwise have been dissidents. There were all sorts...
Why would they do that?
Well,
why were they
They liked other voices. They had, in many ways, a sophistication which the rest of the Russian bureaucracy did not have, because they had so much more acquaintance with foreign ways. They also knew so much more about what had to be masked from the Soviet people themselves. And so they saw themselves as frontliners, and they saw themselves as capable of giving accommodation to much more dangerous opinion than was allowed outside the building. So to use Lyndon Johnson's term, better have him inside the tent.
Yes, we're talking about J. Edgar Hoover. Better have him inside than out,
exactly,
than outside.
Doing the other thing out,
right.
or the same thing.
But when you, how do they justify Hungary? How do they justify some of the acts on behalf of the state? Does it simply come down to the ends justify the means, and the belief in a greater ideal?
This is the question I would like to ask Markus Wolf, particularly, who is the former head of the East German intelligence service.
Markus Wolf, yes.
Yeah, constantly claims.
Who's now writing his memoirs.
Yes, that's right. And I shall no doubt read how I appointed him my hero. I think he's a creep. I think he's sort of a version of Albert Speer. I think gradually we will come to recognize that he was much more involved than he presently pretends. I think that for the true communist, the true believer, who really was in that mindset, it was possible for them to take the view that communism was not ready for the reforms implicit in the Hungarian counter-revolution or revolution. I can just understand it if I make a big intellectual stretch and remember what the beginnings of communism were, the historical theory behind it, the social theory behind it, the capitalist theory behind it. But in human terms, it seems to you and me absolutely incomprehensible that they can allow it to happen.
Let me turn to Panama. You believe that the Tailor of Panama is your best work since perhaps The Perfect Spy, which is in a part, was autobiographical, in part.
Yes.
Yes?
I do.
Why?
It's got more fun, more bounce.
Yeah, it does.
And it has something very personal to me, as A Perfect Spy had. In my central character, Harry Pendle, for reasons I cannot yet fully define, but we can try and work it out together, I find a secret sharer, a real companion who took me through the book. And I think it may have something to do with a latent guilt which is in creative people about the way they misuse the truth themselves, particularly if they're writers, fiction writers, the way they seize anything that comes to hand, adapt it and distort it, and so on. Thomas Mann was always pursued by the guilt of creativity and wrote short and long stories about it, and expressed it in the form of disease in novels like The Magic Mountain.
Right.
And so Harry and I are a pair of crooks in that sense. I think I feel that affinity with him and that understanding. We both had very battered childhoods, and the effect of that, I think, is to turn you in upon yourself and very much excite the power of imagination and fantasy, so that this orphan kid who didn't know half the time whether he was a Catholic or a Jew, who was brought up by nuns first and then resettled by his Uncle Benny and so on. Pendle, incidentally, in German means pendulum.
Pendulum, swinging back and forth.
He is a bit of a clone of my own mixed-up childhood, I think. And he, too, was turned in upon himself.
Ambivalence about your father, your mother, you didn't know until you were 21,
that's right.
really, and you went to the hospital you've talked about before.
All those wonderful riches that belong in a novelist's childhood.
Right.
They belonged in his, but he wasn't a novelist. But he did learn from very early the self-defense which is implicit in lying, which small children have. You know, if you've ever taught, there's always some kid who's amazing at spinning the tale. Yeah. And if he does something delinquent and the cops take him, they spend 3 days breaking him because he actually believes the story he's telling.
Yes.
And Pendle's had that background and developed that skill. And it isn't simply a skill, it's a life system, it's a survival system.
And his most influential influence, his strongest influence, his Uncle Benny, was a con artist.
Was a con artist, and Uncle Benny did instruct Pendle in the arts of survival, his nephew, in the arts of survival. And I think that if you've learned very early, as Pendle did, that confrontation is damn dangerous, you avoid it. So these are all detours around the truth that he learned. And when, poor man, he is summoned to the flag in order to spy for his country and report, act as a listening post, and report about what is going to happen to Panama at the turn of the century when the canal is given back to the Panamanians and the American garrisons move out and so on, he inclines immediately to fabrication.
Yeah. Now I want to come back just for the audience's sake. This is a story of a tailor in Panama who has created this legacy about himself, which is not true. He came from an interesting background you just outlined, but he's drawn into spying because the Brits believe that something may be going on down there, and then he begins to elaborate and exaggerate and falsify what he knows and what he's supposed to know, and then he turns it over to his handler, Oxnard, who does the same thing for his superiors. We're often running about this guy, and he's interesting because he is a tailor, and he therefore has access to everybody of influence in your book.
Yes.
He knows the truth or doesn't know the truth? And does he lose some sense of, you know?
Does he lose some sense of?
Of what is truth? And does he know what's true?
I'm not sure. I don't think he knows very clearly what is true. And I don't think the truth is his subject. I think his subject is surviving under this frightful pressure. So he will tell partly the truth and partly his fabrications.
Because somebody has him by the...
Has him by the parts, yes. And I think it's a mechanism that he's used for so long. See, if you have absolutely no faith in life, you really don't see truth as a useful weapon.
It's not relevant.
It's not relevant. So I think it's more that it's very hard for me to say whether he really knows what is true. My immediate response is to say if the truth leapt up and bit him in the backside, he wouldn't know it, wouldn't recognize
that's why it's a question.
But I don't think it's quite true. His immediate response as a kind of one-man service industry is to cut the cloth as a tailor according to what people want.
And by cutting according to what they want, he makes them into something, he makes them, he hides their faults, exaggerates their assets.
That's right.
So all of a sudden they become something they're not, but something that's pleasing.
Yes, and he does this in a figurative sense when he is inventing stories about the same characters and passing them up the line to the British spies.
He's not a moral force, though.
In the end,
Martha.
I believe he atones in some way. Martha is a moral woman.
Yes.
And in his relationship with Martha resides, for me, the truth. I don't think he's ever lied to Martha. And when he leaves his family right at the end, I don't want to give away too much of the store, but he simply cannot abide any longer the company of people to whom he has lied so badly, and upon whom he has brought such destruction. So if there's anyone to find, it is the person to whom he has told the truth.
I'm sorry, the
person to whom he has told the truth.
That's the person that he...
Who goes in search of. Yes, Martha.
He's going in search of her.
Yes.
Because in the end, he's always been truthful to her.
He has been, yes, even in a moderate way. He's been economic with the truth, but I don't think he's ever lied to her.
The background you share with him, all those forces, what else do you share with him?
I certainly share the inherited instinct to give the reader what he wants. Not what he thinks he wants, perhaps, but what I feel he wants.
And what's good for him or what you think he wants?
Well, in this wonderful game that the writer plays with the reader, there is the humanist conviction that people are much brighter and their horizons are much broader than they themselves give them credit for. So
you believe that?
I believe that.
I do too.
I do believe. I believe you do. And what is wrong with the entertainment industry in the main is that it simply doesn't give people enough credit for their intelligence. And I think it knows very well that if it did, it would be putting itself out of business in many respects. So, yeah, there is something larcenous in the process of making a story and passing it to one's reader. There is something sinful. I mean, it's Graham Greene's chip of ice as you observe life as a writer. It's the corrosive eye that Thomas Mann talks about, that cuts you off from spontaneous relationships because you are a collector of human information. I don't feel quite that badly about it, but anyway, there's some affinity between me and Pendle on that score, which I'll work out over the next 6 months. Meanwhile, you have my therapy.
All right, well, I want to be part of that.
Okay.
It is a homage to Our Man in Havana.
Yes, it is. It's also an homage. I mean, Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana made a wonderful fable of the art of intelligence fabricating. Now, on a more serious note, you can't ask Gorbachev this, but in due course you'll get somebody you can ask. I would love to know what is a rough estimate of the CIA funds that were dissipated on fabricated information brought to them by ingenious intelligence peddlers.
Said another way, how much money did the CIA just throw away because of some fabricated story was brought to them in pursuit, pursuit of something that never was there?
That's absolutely it. You know.
And it was just keeping score, too. It wasn't because, I mean, mainly it was just to one-upmanship or what?
Well, because they fell for great con artists who they came to you or to me at dead of night and said that they had a line to Lenin's niece, who was living alone in Vladivostok and had piles of information which would prove that Lenin was actually a closet capitalist. And, I mean, in those crazy years of the Cold War, we fell for the most wonderful scams. And in your profession, or in the journalistic profession, I mean, editors and correspondents alike go in terror of the fabulist, the faker, the fabricator.
They sure do. I mean,
story.
careers have been ruined. I mean, you just had it, not careers ruined over there with, I mean, this whole business about, you know, the alleged pictures of Princess Diana.
Exactly, or the Hitler Diaries,
one
of my
diaries.
favorite stories.
Exactly. I mean, I think somebody the editor who was responsible for that just died recently, I read somewhere.
Did he?
I think so. And
at a ripe old age and very rich.
Yeah, exactly. But you know that's going to be the first line of his obituary, the Hitler Diaries. Clearly.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the great cons of all time. We had Howard Hughes's diaries. Are you old enough to remember them?
Yes, of course. It was an American writer.
It was indeed.
Who was evidently claiming that he talked to him or something.
Clifford Irving?
Clifford Irving. That's right, a novelist who continues
who
to write.
visited some of your best penal institutions on account of this.
Now, let me get back to the notion of one last question about Russia before we leave. You have nothing but contempt for Kim Philby.
That is absolutely true.
Why is that? Is he any different than any other double-crossing, treasonous human being?
Yes, I think he is a bit. When I was in Russia in '87, I was offered Philby, and as you know, I refused to see him. I never did meet him.
He wanted to meet you.
He wanted to meet me. But I also met Sakharov.
Yeah, well.
And there you have the exact reason why I despise Philby. Sakharov, in a closed, tyrannous society, had the guts to stand up and speak the truth and oppose. Kim Philby was born into, all right, a flawed one, but an open society, a decent democracy, give or take a little. And he chose the secret way. And I think there was in Philby, from childhood, from birth almost, a mechanism that was bound to destroy. Whatever institution you associated him with, whatever friendships or loves or responsibilities you gave him, in the end, there was only betrayal in his mind.
He was corrupt in his soul.
He was corrupt in his soul. And I think that the whole panoply of communism which he claimed to have embraced was simply a cover story for a profound treachery that was in him from the beginning. I think there are some people who are actually evil, and I think Philby was one of them.
If he hadn't found spying, if he hadn't found espionage, if he hadn't found... He would have done something else.
I think so.
Evil.
I mean, priest could forgive him, and would surely do so, but when you think of the deaths that those people suffered, whom he betrayed to the Russians, when you think of the Albanian adventure, when we were training up Albanians and dropping them back into Albania, and by the time they touched down in their parachutes, the secret police were waiting for them, that is not a pain-free conversation that they are about to engage in.
But Aldrich Ames, in those interviews I've seen with him, seems to have zero remorse.
I observed that too, and I read the interrogation report of one of the Congressional Senate subcommittees that interviewed him, interrogated him indeed. And I was fascinated by the money side. I don't know if you remember, but some of the worst, the most appallingly effective secrets he gave away, I think there were 11 agents named. That was in the first exchange with the $50,000 briefcase under the lunch table. And they asked him very sensibly, Mr. Ames, you're a man of business, you wanted money. Why did you give so much for so little in the first encounter? And so they go through that. Later he raised the ante. If he properly represented, he could have got 10 or 15 million every time. It didn't matter. I mean, you pay anything for that kind of information. But I longed for them to ask the question they didn't ask. And that brings him closer to Philby, if the answer is what I think he is. Mr. Ames, if you had been very, very rich and inherited a great fortune when you were a young man, and then you were in the CIA, would you still have betrayed those people? And there I think he might have had to pause, because I think the malice in Ames was very strong. The malice, yes, the hidden dagger. He was drinking a lot. He seemed to despise his colleagues. He thought the whole outfit was a waste of time.
But is pecuniary gain malice? No.
No, I mean that if there was no monetary motive, if it wasn't just money he wanted, in other words, if I were able to say to him, Mr. Ames, remove the money motive. Let's say you've got all the money in the world. Would you still have shafted those guys? Would you still have betrayed them?
What?
I think he'd have said, oh, my God, yes, I would.
Yeah, he would have known the truth about himself.
Yes, and I think that would have been a moment of self-revelation. I mean, he's pathetically cooperative, seemingly so. And really, when you're going to spend the rest of your life indoors, as he is, without a window, those conversations become a lifeline.
And you think we'll find the same thing about Marcus Wolf, who didn't do it because of money, but he did it for some reason because he was an evil man?
No, I don't think he was evil. I think he was an apparatchik. I think he simply conformed. And I think he also loved the privileges and the wealth and the esteem that he enjoyed. And I think he liked the game for itself. He was a power freak. And I don't think that he considered the ethics and moralities of his position in the least. And when he would say to me, if we met, as I'm sure he would, oh, come on, we were both doing it. You know, we were different sides of the same coin. My reply would be, not so at all. Our system was indeed flawed. Yours was absolutely disgusting. And you were in a position to know that perfectly well from your own experience and observation. And I don't see, Mr. Wolf, how you could possibly have served that society, that state, knowing how rotten it was from top to bottom. It really was a hateful little outfit.
He was Carla.
He was not Carla.
No, he was not Carla.
Not Carla. I hadn't heard of Marcus Wolf in any of that. And why should I choose as a Russian a German?
I don't know, because you knew about him. He didn't inform your character at all.
Not in the least. Not in the least. No. He potters around saying that he did.
I know.
And it's a bit like other things. The moment you start denying them, everybody believes that he's right.
Let me turn to Panama, only because I want to get into some Panama.
Okay.
Panama, 7 years before this book, you're in Miami.
Yes.
And you're doing research.
Right.
And you go to the DEA.
Yes.
And you say, where do I find money laundering?
Yep.
Answer?
Panama.
Where do I find drugs?
In enormous quantities.
In enormous quantities.
Please.
In enormous quantities. Tons.
Panama. Yeah.
Where do I find a den of spies?
Panama. And where do I find a place where an illegal arms dealer can give a demonstration of firepower to representatives of the drugs cartels so that he can sell them a private army?
Panama.
Exactly. Yes.
So you say, I've got to go to Panama.
Yes, that's right. And I went, and it was a riot.
and you met Endara.
I met Endara.
Who was the who won the election on Noriega. I've forgotten exactly my history for a second, but Noriega refused to allow him to...
He stood against Noriega, one hands down. He was a brave man.
Noriega said, this election is canceled.
It did not happen. Yes, you were all mistaken. It's not operative.
There are 1.5 million, there are 3 million votes, and I have one. The one wins.
Exactly.
That's what Noriega said.
Right.
Goodbye, Mr. Andara.
If you're a dictator, that's what you say. Very right, too.
And so then the Americans come in.
The Americans come in the moment Just Cause was over. Even
Just Cause was the operation, the title given to the operation to go down and get Noriega.
Get Noriega. So the moment that was successful, they took Ndara down to a military airfield and they swore him in as president without troubling the electorate. But understandably, since he'd won once, so the match was on again.
Of course.
Yeah. And then Ndara, I thought, was a sweet man, married to a very beautiful young wife.
Second wife.
Second wife, yes. His first wife died, and then he rather quickly married a lady who was suspected of having been his girlfriend during that time. And
no surprise there.
And she's Anna May, and just before he left office, to the astonishment of everybody, I think, and I hope of Anna May and Ndara too, she won the national lottery.
Oh, that's right. And he said, of course not. It was all above board.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, what did she win, like $1 million or?
It was a hefty sum. I don't know whether as much as that. But, and he said, he was very sweet, and he said, he introduced me to her, and he said, and darling, this is the great writer, you know, Le Carré, the spy writer. And she said, who? And he said, oh, come on, darling, you've read all his wonderful books. You know, he's a very, very, everybody knows about him. And she said, nope. And so my
like
residual...
Already. Don't you? Huh? I like her already.
I love her already. And also my residual diplomatic skills came into action. And I said, Madam President, no earthly reason why you should know me. But you have heard of Mr. Sean Connery and Miss Michelle Pfeiffer. And I have to tell you that at the showing of my last movie, I held Michelle Pfeiffer's hand for a moment, and Sean Connery, and she said, you know, Mr. Connery? And I said, yes, I do. You are welcome to Panama, she said. So,
that's great.
That was heaven.
Now, how do you, when you were going to do research, you know Panama is more and more attractive. And there was an interesting little piece in the New York Times Magazine about this, how you selected Panama, why it was intriguing, all the things we went through. When you get there, you've done your research, you've talked to people, you talked to the DIA, and you've done your research, and you arrive, everybody opens their door. Because when you reach the stage that you are at, reputation you have. It's like Bob Woodward in America.
Yes.
Every politician, whatever institution he's investigating, they want to talk to the great Bob Woodward.
Yes, yes.
It's true.
Well,
and you go to dinner and you have some wine, and by God, everything you always wanted to know, you know.
Well,
because they're honored that you'll ask, and they can't wait to please you by telling you everything they know.
Well, I wish it were as simple as that, Charlie. But anyway, some of that stuff does happen. And, of course, Panama has a tiny ruling class. I mean, you're moving through really 300 or 400 people who run the place. And
they all know each other.
And they all know each other. And many of them hate each other in a rather joyous, ebullient way. And they love telling you the worst things they can think of about one another. And so information is not hard to come by. And they're wonderfully quick, too, to forgive. I mean, it's a kind of self-sealing tank that operates there. You know, the bullet passes through and the heels over. So half the people who are now in power, you know, they said of Noriega at the end of Operation Just Cause, when they went to nab him, it was said by some wit in Panama that they got Alibaba but missed the 40 thieves.
Did you go talk to him at all?
Noriega? No, I would like to. I would have liked to very much.
Man. I mean, I know some people going down to talk to him, and he always wears his uniform, perhaps made by
and he
by Pendle at Braithwaite.
I hope so.
Made out of the finest alpaca, sir.
Right, that's right. and I think I wonder whether he wears his Légion d'honneur, which was given to him by the French,
because
he accommodated the French Air Force when it was coming through with its beastly weapons to let off in the South Pacific. And so money changed hands.
That story's in there, too.
Yes, it is.
I mean, what's amazing about it is you find out all these stories, and they're all there.
Yes, well, does entertain, and it does give color and character to the place.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming.
Thank you very much.
John Le Carré, the book is The Tailor of Panama. We'll be right back. Stay with us.